Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the webinar today. Our webinar is on improving the surety underwriting process through standards. We want to thank our co-host for the program today, the National Association of Surety Bond Producers, the NASBP, for helping us put this program together. And I want to welcome all of our attendees and all of our speakers. I'm just going to go through a couple of logistical points before I introduce our speakers. You can send questions into us by clicking on the Q&A link that you see at the top of the button, top of the screen rather there, and just submit your questions. We will do a Q&A session at the end, and we will potentially take questions throughout the process. We are offering CPE for today's program for those of you interested in getting CPE accreditation. Just make sure that you respond to the questions that will be asked twice during the program today. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead to our first screen here, and we're going to talk through the agenda. Today we're going to be covering, we're going to start off with the business case for standards in the surety underwriting process. Our speaker will be Greg Davenport. Greg is a Senior VP for Global Operations at Liberty Mutual Surety, where he's responsible for process management, e-business, analytics, communications training, and home office administration. Greg is actively involved in surety industry automation and e-business initiatives. He's the past chair of the SFAA's E-Business Advisory Committee and Accord's Surety Standards Subcommittee. He also served on Accord's Global Standards Committee, so we're very happy to have Greg with us today. After that, I'm going to be covering the rationale for the XBRL standard, and I am obviously with XBRL US. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the use of standards for business reporting. We'll then be covering a couple of CPE questions and then move on to our demonstrations. Our first demonstration will be on how contractors create the automated work-in-process report. And this is going to be presented by Balaji Muthukrishnan. Balaji is Senior VP of Client Services at datatype, where he's developed and introduced XBRL solutions for a number of reporting domains, including SEC reporting in the US, taxonomy reporting, tax reporting through the HMRC in the UK, and for other regulators in countries including India, Ireland, and the European Union. Our second demonstration will be on how sureties can consume an automated work-in-process report. And this we're pleased to have with us Alexander Falk, who is president and CEO and also co-founder of Altova, which is a software provider that specializes in development and integration projects with software. Before founding Altova, Alexander was a software engineer with Apple Computer for a number of years. Our next and final speaker will be Robert Kuhn. Robert is Vice President of Surety Services for Scott Insurance, and he is speaking to us on behalf of the NASBP. Robert has over 30 years experience as an underwriter and agent. He is the president of the Piedmont chapter of the CFMA, and he sits on Caroline's Agency Supplier and Service Company Advisory Committee. After Robert speaks, we're going to have CPE questions, and we'll go straight to Q&A. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Greg Davenport, who's going to take us through the business case.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm going to spend a few minutes just explaining the business case and essentially why we, as key stakeholders in the construction industry, came to XBRL for help with creating standards specifically for the work-in-process schedule. So most of you are probably familiar with this good old work-in-process schedule that we all know and love. And one of the challenges of it is that it's in generally a PDF format, that's just a document, or sometimes in Excel, which has data fields, but that data is named differently, it's in different order, etc. So if you go to the next slide, please. You're familiar with this flow, the current process. The contractor sends the financials to their CPA firm, or occasionally they'll send them to the agent, surety agent, or surety company directly, particularly for interim work-in-process schedules, but definitely the year-end and maybe a mid-year review or audit, they'll send to the CPA firm. They create the document. Again, it comes back in a PDF. And then it goes back to the surety bonding agent and eventually the surety, where those of us on the surety side rekey that information into our software programs for further analysis. You can go to the next slide, please. Of course, those of us that do this for a living know that it's highly manual, very time-consuming. There can be errors, and it's costly because of the labor that's involved with it. So here's where the role of standards comes into play. They've been used throughout history to reduce cost, increase timeliness and accuracy, and some very common examples of standards are the standards that are used for electricity, for example, UPC codes, the internet, PDF. So they're the rules by which data is described and recorded. In order to share, exchange, and understand the data, we need to standardize the format as well as the meaning. So that's where XBRL comes into play. XBRL stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language, and it's a financial data standard used in the United States today for reporting by public companies to the Securities and Exchange Commission and by bank institutions reporting to the FDIC to reduce cost and improve accuracy and timeliness. XBRL is also being used in the U.S. for government agencies reporting award spending data to the government. The U.S. Treasury and the Office of Management and Budget are rolling out that program right now. So XBRL is used extensively outside the U.S. as well, as many countries use it to report financial data for public and private companies, reporting to regulators and to tax authorities, and for government reporting. So essentially, it's a version of XML, and it's a standard that's computer readable. It's clearly defined to creators, intermediaries, and end users, and it would be available to sureties at a lower cost, which would reduce the opportunity for fraud and increased accuracy, and of course, more timely. So here's how the process will work as we're proposing it. So the contractor would create their periodic work in process reports they traditionally do through their financial system or an Excel format. There are many XBRL creation tools on the market today, and hopefully more that will be developed, which will be used by companies that are required to file financial data to the SEC in XBRL format. Many of those same vendors are in the process of adapting their existing tools so they can be used to convert WIP data into XBRL. Contractors would likely then create both a PDF or Excel version as they do today, plus the XBRL version would be created as a byproduct automatically, we hope. Later on this webinar, we'll be demonstrating one of these tools and how it works. So once the two documents are received by the surety, the surety's financial system can automatically ingest the XBRL version of the work in process report into their financial system, and they can begin conducting analysis immediately. There's no need to rekey the data. This should not require changing the surety's financial system. It will only require doing a one-time mapping of those of us that are sureties into our existing systems into XBRL terms created to identify WIP data. And the same actually goes for financial data overall. It's just a piece that was missing for a complete financial package from a contractor was WIP data. Other standards already exist, by the way. So once the data is available, each surety can process information in their own manner. For example, system could send an alert to an underwriter, make the data available on a staging platform, or it can be reviewed and approved, or it could be automatically ingested into our databases. Each surety will have their own process to validate, review, and analyze the data. Actually, the same would go with banks or any other users of information, or if the contractor or surety broker agent wanted to have a similar system. So it's available to and could be done by more than just a surety. And we'll be showing a demonstration of one possible mapping tool later in the seminar as well. So the benefits of the process should be clear. The data can be transferred automatically, reducing the time and cost for the manual labor spent rekeying with each work in process schedule. So to kind of wrap up this section, we engaged with XBRL, and they agreed to put together a pilot program. And these are the sponsoring organizations that are listed here. You can see, and other key participants in the industry that have supported this effort. And we're here today to really update you on the progress to date and explain more about this in this open review process. So the pilot is testing out the premise of XBRL by first creating an XBRL data dictionary of terms. We call that a taxonomy. The terms in the dictionary include concepts such as estimated contract revenue, percent complete, under and over billings, basically all the items that you need to see to create a work in process report. So far, the purpose of the public review is to gather more information from all possible stakeholders, those of you that are on the phone and others that are interested. The organizations listed on the previous slide have weighed in and been very involved. Thank you to those of you that have participated thus far. But we need more input from software providers, from accounting firms that serve the contractors and sureties, and from the sureties and contractors themselves. So that's where you all come in. I'll turn this over to Michelle Savage from XBRL, who will give us more background on the standard and then demonstrate the work in process taxonomy that's been developed. Thank you.
Greg, thanks very much. Yes, and as Greg was saying, we've already received a lot of input to the taxonomy, but we need more. We want the entire industry involved because ultimately we want this to be usable and functional for everyone. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on XBRL, and I'll try not to get too technical. It's actually not necessary for all of you to understand a lot about XBRL because a lot of what will be developed through the software tools will make it pretty transparent and easy to implement. So XBRL, which stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language, is an XML-based markup language. Now, XML, for those of you who aren't all that familiar with it, is a markup language that was developed by the World Wide Web. It is a data standard, and it's designed to make data that previously had been paper-based and essentially locked in reports into information that can be read and used by a computer. And that means that if it can be read by a computer, it doesn't need to be keyed in. It doesn't require interpretation. So XML is an open source standard, which means that whatever is developed is essentially free. It's a global standard, and it's used to what's called tag data, to embed information into that data point. One example of this is what you see on the bottom of this screen, where you look at the number 7. Okay, the number 7 by itself is pretty meaningless to a computer, except unless it's tagged and the information about that piece of data is embedded into it. So what you see in the angle brackets, which is essentially how you tag things in XML, is a descriptor explaining what that is. It's number of buildings. So we know that the number 7 represents the number of buildings. Without those tags, we wouldn't know that, or a computer wouldn't know that. That's essentially what XML does. Okay, so how does XBRL factor into that? XBRL is something, is kind of layered on top of XML, and it adds structure to XML to establish standard ways to report information that you typically find in financial data. Things like reporting periods. Is it a moment in time or a period in time? Decimals, the entity being reported, the units of measure. Is it US dollars? Is it euros? What's the concept reported, and what's the definition of that concept? So XBRL has been developed as a way of standardizing certain pieces of information that are commonly found in financial data. So just to give an example of how this works, let's take a look at the work in process report that Greg was showing a little bit earlier. We'll look at an individual fact, and what I've done is kind of extracted a bit out here so it's a little easier to read. You can see this figure, 12,113,470. Okay, we can look at the columns and the rows of this table, and we can determine that the value is defined as earned contract revenue. We know it's for contract number 200. If we look at that on the row, we know that it's for the period from inception to December 31st, 2014. But a computer can't read this data, even though it's in Excel in this example, or it could be in PDF or whatever. A computer does not know what that number represents, doesn't know that it's in US dollars, it doesn't know what units it's in. So today, individuals at Sureties are required to key this information into their financial systems manually in order for their systems to actually recognize what that data point means. With XBRL, we're going to take all the parameters or all the characteristics of that data point and embed it into that concept, into that fact. So this is where a data standard like XBRL really comes into play. This image kind of diagrams out how that value of 12 million would be defined in an XBRL document. The taxonomy, which you can see represented by the green box that's labeled concept, sort of in the lower left-hand corner, is the digital collection of terms that Greg talked about that defines the reporting needs. So it defines things like earned contract revenue, contract percent complete, estimated revenues and costs for individual jobs or contracts. So the taxonomy is that collection of terms that includes all of those elements. So the instance document, which is kind of married with the taxonomy, explains the specific reporting situation. For a specific work in process report created by some contractor that contains performance information for a set group of contracts, in process or completed. That is what the instance document represents. So the taxonomy plus the instance document equals the final XBRL document. So in this example, that value of 12,113,470 has data embedded into it. From the taxonomy, it has the name of the concept, earned contract revenue. From the instance document that's created to report this, we define the entity name, ABC Contractor, the contract number 200, which is a dimension of that value. We can see that it's in US dollars, that's the units. It's in millions, and we have the time period represented here as well. So all of that data, or metadata, is really packed around that data point so the computer knows exactly what it's looking at. Just to take this a step further, if we look at a different example, here we look at the value for 9,246,924. This is, you can see it's under the contract revenue column, or contract costs rather, from inception to December 31st. Let's take a look at how this value would be defined in XBRL. Okay, this is, and actually I think it should be contract costs is the concept, but everything else stays the same. So that same value has metadata embedded around it that helps a computer understand what it's working with. So hopefully that helps clarify kind of how XBRL works. And as Greg mentioned earlier, all public companies in the US today report their financials to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, in XBRL format. They use a taxonomy called the US GAAP Financial Reporting Taxonomy, and it's maintained by the Financial Accounting Standards Board. This taxonomy is currently being used as the basis for the work in process taxonomy, because there is overlap in many of the concepts that are used, like revenue and gross profit and loss. The XBRL standard doesn't change what is reported, only how it's reported. XBRL, as I mentioned, is a global standard. It's used in 60 countries around the world. It's required by over 100 regulators, and it's used by over 10 million companies, both public and private companies around the world. Because it is used so extensively, there is a competitive marketplace of XBRL-enabled tools that can be used to create and consume XBRL formatted data. And that's important because that means that there are lots of tools out there, excuse me, lots of options both for contractors and sureties and how they can begin working with the data. Okay, so as our first step in the pilot, we created this collection of terms that describes all the items that you would need in a work in process report. We use the US GAAP taxonomy as our basis, as I mentioned. And this screenshot actually looks at the current US GAAP taxonomy that's used by public companies. It contains about 15,000 individual concepts covering things like income statement data and balance sheet concepts. It also covers disclosures in specific area. And the screenshot that you see here shows some of those industry-specific disclosures. The arrow that you see is pointing to disclosures specific to contractors that happen to be public companies. So when we created the work in process report, we inserted the terms that we used for the WIP report here into this section. So this disclosure 910000 for contractors, we embedded the WIP report kind of underneath there, WIP concepts under that. And the WIP taxonomy uses many of the same concepts that you already find in the US GAAP taxonomy, so we didn't have to recreate that, and it's consistent with what people are reporting with already. This screenshot just takes a look at the WIP report itself, or the WIP taxonomy. The disclosure number 910100, as you can see, fits directly under the contractor section in the US GAAP taxonomy. And if you look a little bit further down into at the red box here, you can see that there are groupings of concepts that are called abstracts that are used to represent revenues, costs, and gross profits. These are the most commonly used terms in the WIP report. And this next slide looks at, takes an individual category, and you can find that for each category, there's data for different points in time that we need to use in the working process report. Here, we see revenue, earned to date, revenue yet to be earned, and estimated revenue total. This image shows, just points out the contract billings concept. So this is another grouping of information where we include the elements contract billings from inception to date, billings in excess of costs and estimated earnings, costs and estimated earnings in excess of billings. So when you look at the taxonomy, and later on Robert is going to show you how to actually get into it, create a registration, and begin using it and looking at it, you'll be able to click on any place where there is a plus sign, which hopefully you can see that on this screenshot, and then open it up to see the hierarchy of terms. And finally here, we've highlighted the concept of percent complete. So hopefully this gives you a sense for how the taxonomy is structured, and we hope that it really piques your interest about taking a look at the taxonomy itself. So before I move on to our next speaker, which is going to be the demonstration, we're going to cover some CPE questions. And the CPE questions, again, are for those of you who would like to get CPE credit for the class today, or the session today. And we're going to bring up that CPE question in just a minute here. Okay, so our first poll question. The XBRL standard is based on which of the following? And again, just click on the button here and record your response. Is it based on XML, HTML, or PDF? And we'll just give you a minute to record that response. Okay, we're going to close up our polls in a couple of minutes here, so please make sure to record your response. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and close that poll, and we'll go to our second poll question. Okay, XBRL stands for which of the following? Exceptional business reporting language, extensible business reporting language, or XML business reporting language? Again, just click on the response that you think is most appropriate to record it. Okay, and we will also send the answers to the poll questions when we send the replay tomorrow. So we're also going to be recording this, and we'll send out the replay to the program. So please record your response. Okay, we're going to close down that poll. Great. Okay, thank you everyone for answering those. And okay, and now we're going to move to our first demonstration. And as you saw, Greg explained sort of what the proposed process is, and now we're going to talk about one software program that could be used to actually create the working process report. But as we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different tools out there, and this is one example to give you an idea of how this could work. So I'm going to turn this over to Balaji Muthukrishnan.
Thanks, Michelle. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for participating in this webinar. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to demonstrate how you could convert a work-in-process report into an automated XBRL report, and how that it could be transmitted to the sureties. So XBRL, as you may know by now, is not just for the financial reports. It could be used for any reports. All you need is a software to get the input data. It requires a taxonomy and conversion of an XBRL file. So that being the process, we understand how to simplify this process. So on the screen, what you look is a sample input file, which is a construction contracts in progress report. So just keep this input file in mind. This input could be in a PDF document, or it could be in Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. So let's move on to the next slide. This is our application where we have the simple Excel spreadsheet interface. We understand every person's reporting structure. If you could see, there is work in progress report with construction contracts completed, construction contracts in progress. So to the bottom, the third table that you see is the contracts in progress table that we help contractors create according to their reporting structure. So we make sure that a report is created as per your reports. In the next screen, all right, in this screen, we help as a one-time activity. There is a mapping that is done between data that you report in your WIP reports. We help you map that to each and every component from the taxonomy. As Greg mentioned earlier, the mapping is what actually links the reporting data component in your report. We help to map the right concept from the WIP taxonomy. So this sheet helps you map the components, and we automate the currency and other various other attributes that are required to be associated with valid XBRL file. So moving on to the next slide. Now, this is the application that actually converts your mapped concepts into XBRL file. You could drop down and select the type of report. View XBRL attributes that could be useful for review purposes. You could also make some changes here if you would like to make changes. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is again another statement within the WIP report where all the highlighted cells in blue color represents XBRL tags have been applied to these data. So if you're satisfied that every cell with the numbers are completely tagged, it is just for you to ensure that the report is completed with in terms of XBRL to your satisfaction. Just a control that gives you whether the report is completed or if there are some concepts that needs to be tagged. It helps you in that front. And moving on to the next slide. All right. Now there are essentially there is one output for XBRL report, which is an XML file, which is only a machine-readable file. We understand before you transmit any XBRL report, you may want to review that by yourself, and we need to make that a human-readable version. So as an industry standard, every software, XBRL software, has two types of output. One is the actual XBRL file by itself, which is a machine-readable file, and second, there's always a human-readable file, which is used to review and approve for further transmission to sureties, etc. So this is just a summary of how many reports are included within the XBRL file. As you could see, there are 4 different reports here. One is the document information, entity information. Then there's a disclosure pertaining to earnings from construction contracts, disclosure pertaining to construction contracts completed, and finally construction contracts in progress. So it helps you to review the XBRL, the amount that are reported with various XBRL attributes, and it gives you in summary how many items have been approved, how many have been unapproved, and how many has not yet been reviewed. So this is not a mandatory process that you need to follow, but it gives you an internal control if you have the preparer reviewer process. So this could be a handy tool to review. In the next slide. Yeah, this is one of the reports, human-readable output that helps you review the XBRL file in detail. If you look at the columns A, B, C, and D, they represent the labels and the amount that you report, and from columns E and thereon represent various XBRL attributes, including the taxonomy ID in column F, the data type, the period type, the scale that has been assigned. In case if you represent the amount in millions, the scaling would be 6 in terms of XML reporting structure. The unit, the currency has to be the global currency standards, which is USD for United States dollars, the balance type, etc. So these are something that would be helpful for you to review before you pass on the file to the sureties. And next slide. And yes, finally, the XBRL output by itself, we allow you to generate and save them to your local desktop, and you could transfer them to the sureties or bonding agent. So before we allow you to generate the XBRL file, we make sure the validation rules are executed. So that could be basic validation. The validation could be extended to any level. So whatever the validations are in place from time to time, we keep our application updated with those latest validation rules, and all our output generated out of the application would adhere to those validation rules, and making it completely error-free XBRL output. So that in a nutshell is how we help report into an XBRL report. And it's a straightforward process that involves a one-time mapping activity, and that would we could integrate with your underlying system as well, if we can take it to that level as well. Or we could keep it simple where we allow you to copy and paste the data from your existing reports into our application, and thereby you could generate the XBRL output. So with that, that comes to the end of this demonstration of our application. Over to you, Michelle.
Balaji, thanks very much. We're going to move on to the next demonstration, and I'm going to turn it over to Alexander Falk.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you everybody for attending today. I want to talk to you right now about how Sureties can automatically consume such an XBRL work in progress report and import it into their internal database systems. And just to set the stage here, we're not talking about actually transferring the file over. We assume that it's going to be transmitted by the contractor either via email or an FTP server or VPN connection. So that's something for the IT departments to worry about. And I'm also not going to talk about how the Surety then internally presents that data to underwriters, because we simply assume that you have your own internal IT and database systems that allow that process to happen. What I want to focus here in this segment of the demo is how you get the data from XBRL into your internal databases, because that's sort of the portion that creates a little bit of anxiety with IT departments and DBAs that have not yet previously had experience with XBRL. And I want to show you here how quickly and easily that can actually be done by using a mapping tool such as Altovo MapForce to define such a data mapping process that takes the data out of the XBRL taxonomy and inserts it into a database table. For this demonstration here, I created a very simple target database table that basically is a flat database schema with just one table that has one column per typical concept that you see in your WIP report. Clearly, in the real-world system, your internal databases will be much more complex than that, but the tool that I'm going to show you can map to any sort of relational database schema, whatever that may look like. Can we go to the next slide, please? So quick introduction to what our MapForce product can do. It essentially allows you to drop data sources such as XBRL documents or databases into a design surface and then develop a mapping from one data format to another by simply drawing connecting lines between those elements in your design surface. So it's pretty much like building a little circuit board with connecting the integrated circuits on that board. And there's also a complete library included that allows functions for conversions, calculations, etc., to be added to your data mapping. Next slide, please. So when we now add an XBRL data source to our mapping tool, what you will see inside the mapping tool, and I realize it's probably a little bit hard to see here on the screen, it's on the right side, is what the XBRL file looks like, and that's pretty much what you saw in the previous part of the topic when Michelle was talking about how the XBRL looked like. So it's the same concepts that you are familiar with from the XBRL taxonomy, now visible inside that mapping tool, and that's going to be the starting point from which you draw the connections to the database. So once we've added an XBRL data source, in the next slide, we will then add a database, and we support, whoop, that was one too far. Thank you. We support all sort of database backends, anything from SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, etc. That was one too far. Now we're at the right. We're going back and forth. One more. I need the one with the database import. No. Forward. Yes. Okay. So we support all sorts of database backends, DB2, Informix, Sybase, PostgreSQL, whatever you want. And once you connect to such a database server, you can then import a database object into your mapping design, and that creates a little object that looks like the one you see in the bottom right corner here, which represents your database. And now that you have your XBRL data source and your database, next slide, please, we can now start making connections. And you do that by simply drawing connecting lines from these little triangles on one data structure to the triangles on the other data structure. And in this particular case, we would connect the lines from the contract number axis, since we want to map each contract into a row into our database, and then proceed to map all the underlying elements such as contract number or contractor name, etc. Next slide, please. And at that point in time, we may need to use data type conversion functions where necessary. You will probably find that sometimes data types inside the XBRL may not match exactly one-to-one to the data types that you have used inside your database. And we provide all the necessary conversion functions that allow you to convert date types, times, currencies, etc. Next slide, please. Another aspect you will probably encounter is the need to filter the data or distribute it over different tables as you import it from the XBRL. I won't go into too much detail here, but in the XBRL we have different contexts for instant durations and for time durations, and those sometimes need to be mapped either to different tables or need to be mapped to the same table in different ways. We have all the filter functions available here, as well as the ability to map two different tables in the database that are linked, for example, by a pair of primary key and foreign keys. And typically for database administrators or IT folks, using a mapping tool like this makes it very easy to see how that mapping process is going to play out in real life. Next slide, please. And last but not least, we will probably need to do some calculations or use if-else statements, because sometimes the mapping might not be a one-to-one mapping. One example might be that when you're thinking about billings in excess of costs and earnings versus costs and earnings in excess of billings, those are, in this particular XBRL WIP taxonomy, two separate facts that are reported. You might have a situation where in your database you only want to have one column that's called under and over billings and want to report one value as a positive and the other value as a negative. Again, you can simply use functions from our library to put in an if-else statement that maps those to one joint element. Next slide, please. And so putting it all together, this is the final mapping that we've created here from the WIP report XBRL taxonomy to our database structure that correctly maps all the fields in there. Takes about, I don't know, depending on the complexity of your database, maybe half an hour, maybe an hour to put this all together. And once you've defined that mapping, we can then immediately use the preview tool to look at the output. Next slide, please. And the nice thing about our MapForce tool is it gives you an output preview tab where you can then, in this particular case, because the target is a database, see the SQL script that would be executed against the database. And if we actually execute those instructions, at the bottom of the screen, you now can see a few rows of contracts that have been now created inside the target database. So that's really the process in MapForce. Next slide, please. To summarize, it's really easy to develop such a mapping from any XBRL formatted report into its target database in MapForce. And once this mapping is defined, you can now import any future XBRL WIP report without any further additional steps. You define the mapping once and you just execute it. The whole process can be automated with a workflow server. We have a server-based version of the product called MapForce Server and FlowForce Server that allows you to then, for example, execute such a mapping based on an event trigger, for example, when a XBRL work in progress report is received in a certain directory through any other IT process. And we can deploy those server products either in your local IT infrastructure or in the cloud, and they run on Linux and Windows operating systems. Next slide, please. I want to just briefly mention a second product that we offer for XBRL in case you have a more complex requirement, or when you have larger numbers of WIP reports that you want to import into the system. We have a high-performance server product called our RaptorXML+XBRL Server. That's an XBRL processing engine for parallel processing that's used by typically large regulators like Bank of Indonesia to process massive quantities of XBRL documents. So if your needs go beyond a simple mapping to larger ones, we have a full API that allows you to tailor that process. Next slide, please. And there are some links here that show you a way to retrieve some open source samples of how to use that server technology if you're interested in that. And with that, back to you, Michelle. Thank you.
This is Robert.
Thank you very much. I'm going to, Robert, before we jump into your section, I'm going to take a couple of questions that have come in, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I apologize for the technical problems we had. That was completely my mistake there. So one question we received is, what is the incentive for private company contractors to go to the effort and expense of implementing XBRL? And I'm going to turn this over to Greg and Robert also to see if you can help us with that question.
Sure, this is Greg. I'll start. First of all, hopefully it would be part of the regular financial software package that the contractor has. So that's part of why we're reaching out to the vendor community. And the benefit to the contractor, especially one that needs surety or bank credit, is responsiveness. The faster that we can, as a surety, can analyze the work in process and also adjust the backlog or cost to complete, the more responsive we can be to the contractor's request for surety credit. There's another aspect too to think about, as we've worked with XBRL and some of the seen some of the demos, just as you've seen. Some of the vendors for financial statements have the ability to show benchmarking with like construction companies, and I know that's been at Liberty Mutual a request that we've received from many of our clients. They want to see how do they stand up to each other. Now, of course, we plan to provide that as a surety, and the broker might be able to, but I would suggest that there'd also be the ability that the contractor, by investing in XBRL or a solution, a financial system that provides it, they could just on their own perhaps get some of that benchmarking data, because XBRL allows to go out to other data sources to maybe get some industry statistics to compare yourself to.
Thank you. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that, Robert?
No, I think that covers it. The biggest thing is that, like most technology, it's probably going to filter down. The larger the contractor is, the more attractive it is initially, and then as adoption increases, it filters down to smaller contractors with smaller budgets. So it's a process.
Thank you. We have one other question. Are construction accounting companies like Sage, Coins, Foundation, et cetera, involved to produce a work in process XBRL file directly from their software? And I think, Greg, you may have answered that a little bit, but I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Well, again, that's part of our I guess, outreach program here to try to engage, starting with today's meeting, of course, to explain to the overall community, all the key stakeholders, including those software vendors, how this works, why we're doing it, how to implement it, and then we can have follow-up discussions and all to hopefully they'll see the value of that investment, and as I mentioned earlier, a marketing opportunity. That if they can incorporate this into their software package, then that's going to be more appealing to the contractor client who buys that package.
Okay, great, thank you. I think we'll move on. We've got a couple of other questions, but we'll hopefully come back to them at the end if we have some time. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Robert now.
Well, actually, the two questions that we addressed are really good segues into what I want to talk about, which is kind of a call to action, and why we have sureties and contractors and CPAs and some of the non-technical people on a call that to this point has been fairly technical. We need to be sure everybody's involved. We've had a pretty good sized group help develop the taxonomy to date, but it's in order to get to that endpoint where we all benefit from the speed of the processing to the accuracy and the efficiency of work in progress, which for the most part has been probably the stepchild of most software packages. We need to have a good foundation, and that's what we're developing today with the XBRL. So what we're going to do is all the material we've developed so far is going to be made available for public review, including a preparer guide, which provides a detailed review of the taxonomy and the concepts for WIP reporting with an explanation on how to use it, which is pretty technical, but you'll also get a viewing tool which shows you the taxonomy and then samples of the XBRL WIP reports, and the entire taxonomy is available for download. There'll be also some demonstration tools that you'll be able to use. You want to go to the next slide. As I said, the taxonomy is a foundation for the automation and adoption to be attractive to everybody. So in order for that to make it work, we need everybody. Not the technical people will need to do their thing, but the surety underwriters, bond agents, contractors, CPAs that are using the data on a day-to-day basis, the group that have set together and developed it to date has been a small group. We've tried to take in as many viewpoints as we can and be sure that the concepts are defined appropriately. But you know, it's like everything. We don't know necessarily what we don't know. We don't have everybody's viewpoint. So we need the additional perspective. So we're asking everyone to go in, look at the taxonomy, look at the labels, the definitions, as we have them defined and labeled, is that correct? Does it need to be tweaked? Or is there something we missed? Is there a concept there that's not there? And then look at what other questions or, or comments are in there, because someone may have said something that you may not agree with. You may agree with the way it is, and somebody wants to change it. We need everybody's perspective to be able to get to the end result. And then look at some of the software tools that are out there and the demonstrations. The goal is to be able to, hit a button, generate a WIP, email it to surety or your agent or other creditor, then hit a button and have all the analysis done. So even on a very large work in progress, it's going to take a lot less than this phone call at the end. Next slide, please. Again, accountants are critical too, because you're one of the translators in between the contractor and the sureties and other creditors that are out there. So again, we need y'all to do the same thing. Software providers, we need to look at the taxonomy and the sample instance documents. Is there something that, again, that needs clarification, needs to be improved or changed to make it better or more understandable? So that's what we need. So how do you do it? It's pretty easy, actually. You want to go to the next slide? We'll send out a link. You can actually attach to it at the XBRL US Gov Industry Surety address there, and you click the link where it shows the Surety WIP Taxonomy for public review. Next slide. You need to complete a user ID and sign in, and you have to agree to the terms and conditions. XBRL is a free and open standard. Anybody can use it. There's no charge to use it. What you're doing when you agree to this is that you're giving your input free and clear. You're willingly giving it, and you do not expect anything in return. There's no associated intellectual property restrictions tied to your contribution to our effort. Next slide. Once you do that and agree to the terms, you'll get an email which will have a link to it, to the taxonomy viewer. You'll click on that. Next slide. It'll tell you that you need to log in. If this is the first time, you're going to have to actually click on the sign up, because this is where you actually sign up to get your credentials on to edit the site. Next slide. So you'll sign up. You'll add your username and password. Next slide. Most of you will actually see just the lower half of the screen where it's the XBRL US public, and then the WIP and WIP in process version 1. Some of you may see the other parts depending on how much you've worked with them to date, but you'll click on that. Next slide. And then it gets you, this is the actual taxonomy showing the first set of terms in the work in progress report. Click on one to open it. Go ahead and next slide. That'll give you, that'll open up the taxonomy. It's fairly intuitive, I think. Clicking on the rows with a plus sign will open it up. You can close it by clicking on the minus signs. Individual terms will open up the details for the term. Here it talks about revenue. The structure or the hierarchy of the terms is seen on the left side, and on the right is the details of the concept revenues. There's a standard label and a detailed description of that term. It's in the section marks. In the section below, you've got some reference documents. But this is where we need your feedback, really, particularly contractors, CPAs, sureties, agents. Look at what we have it labeled, and then how we have it defined. You can then add your comments on the circle. You can see on the circled part on the right, you can click that and add your comments. You can also see other comments that people have put in there already. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy. Surprised me, but there is a lot of concepts tied to a work in progress. But it's a pretty easy process. I think you'll find it easy to work through. So with that, I think that's pretty straightforward. That's the last slide. We go to the public review for the next month. And hopefully we'll have this published by the end of March. We'll also have, for those of you that attend the NASBP, hopefully we'll have some demonstrations there at the NASBP conference in May. Michelle, did you want to?
Robert, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I just want to encourage people to look at get onto the public review. We'll be sending out information tomorrow, including a replay from the event today, and as well as links to the public review site. And I'd like to get into some questions right now. Let me just go to a slide. This just shows the names of all of our speakers. So we have some questions that have come in, and I'm going to ask those. And then as we go through this, feel free to jump in and post any additional questions that you may have. Okay. So let's see. The one question we got is about having access to the preparer's guide. All of that, as Robert said, is up on our site. So the preparer's guide just walks you through exactly what's included. Let's see. A question came in, is there a requirement to produce a completed contract schedule in the submission? If not, how will the schedule be reconciled with the cost and revenue facts in the financials? Will completed contracts just disappear? I don't know. Greg, is that something that...
I'll jump in on that one. I saw that online too. Yes, I know we are talking just about work in process schedules, but we do intend to include completed contract. That would continue to be part of the package in the submission. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. The question is, are all the necessary business rules going to be provided with the WIP taxonomy? None were provided with the initial example. And the business rules, like validation rules, I'm not sure we've discussed those in the working group calls so far, but that is something that can be, kind of put on the docket as something that we can work on. Greg, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, on business rules.
No, I think your suggestion is a good one, Michelle, to just
because basically
add that and put that on the docket.
We can create a number of business rules that essentially put parameters around what's allowable for values that are reported using the taxonomy, and then that can be used to produce alerts or messages that tell you when things have been introduced incorrectly. Let's see. Another question came in, will XBRL work with the balance sheet and income statement data as well as the job schedules, which I assume means the working process schedules? The US GAAP taxonomy contains all the elements that anyone would ever need for balance sheet and income statement data. It's about 15,000 elements in total. And so that's really why we base this on the US GAAP taxonomy, and that can be used as well if someone is interested in also tagging the other financials that come along with the WIP report.
This is Greg. I'll just add, for those of you in the surety industry, this also applies to commercial accounts. In fact, that's used quite regularly by Edgar Online and other sources, the XBRL reporting. So you can, this isn't just limited to construction contractors, of course. This is the part we're trying to close the loop on, and then we have all financials, balance sheet, income statement, and in the case of construction, work in process and completed contracts.
This is Robert. That is part of the reason, or that's the main reason we joined up with XBRL to provide the work in progress schedule, is because it ties into the financials, and they've already got all the financial data. So it's an add-on to a data standard that's already developed and is pretty mature. So we're just adding a link to it that is pretty specific, primarily to the construction industry.
Great, thank you. Okay, and a question came in, and I think this is the last question we'll take because we're hitting the top of the hour here, but are any sureties today consuming financials transmitted in XBRL format?
This is Greg. I don't have specifics on that, but to my last point, I imagine that there are some that are consuming it for the large publicly traded companies already. And we all have to submit in XBRL format, by the way.
Right, so there's a lot of precedent for, consuming financials in XBRL format, for data aggregators and investment firms, and all of that knowledge and that learning can be translated to the surety industry as well. There have also been a number of people who have expressed interest in getting involved, and that's fantastic. We love to hear that, and just send me an email, and I'll be the one emailing you tomorrow with the replay to the event, the slides, so that you have access to those. I know there was a number of links included in the slides that might be of interest, and also with links to the public review site, and to the taxonomy, and and we hope to hear from you directly. And certainly for any of the software providers or tool providers on the line, we'd love to have individual conversations with you to help you get up to speed in working with the taxonomy and understanding how you can adapt your products to work with it. Again, it's an open source taxonomy. It's a completely free taxonomy, open to everybody. Okay, with that, I'm going to end the call today. I really appreciate everybody's input. I want to thank our speakers, Robert Kuhn, Greg Davenport, Alexander Falk, Balaji Muthukrishnan, for joining us today, and for the NASBP for helping us to get the word out, as well as other organizations who helped us promote this event as well, including CFMA, SFAA, SICPAC, and we appreciate all of your help in getting the word out and helping us get more participation. So thanks very much, and we will have follow-ups to this event. Oh, I forgot, we have additional CPE questions. So I apologize for those of you who are looking for CPE. We have a couple of final questions that do need to be answered before we can give you your credit. Okay, so the first question, XBRL is in use today in the US by which of the following? So please click on the button. Private companies reporting to the IRS, private companies reporting to state regulators, or public companies reporting to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Please be sure to record your vote. And we'll have one more question after this. Okay. The next poll question, how long is the public review and comment period for the work in process taxonomy open? Is it open for 10 days, for 12 months, or for 60 days? Please be sure to record your vote in order to get your CPE. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll send out the answers to the questions in the email that comes out tomorrow. Okay, and I think we can close our final poll. CPE will be provided for those registered for this option today, and the CPE certification will come in within the next 2 weeks. And thank you very much for attending today and for asking your questions. Or for those of you who asked questions that were not answered, we will do our best to come back and respond to those. So thanks again.